How's it going there, family? This is your brother, Ramsey. Peace to you, peace to your home, peace to your family, peace to your community, peace to your ancestry, peace to my community, peace to my ancestry, and peace to the nation that you, I, and they are building. Peace also to the Goddic forces, the great spirit above, the mother below. How y'all doing? How y'all doing? As you can see, got the haircut. Finally got rid of it. It was time. Probably gonna. This is. I'm trying to keep this my look because I like it. It feels nice. It feels good. In the African tradition, as you get older, in most tribes, not all tribes, and not with all positions, by the way, but as you grow into your elderhood, many African tribes require you to cut off your hair, and part of that is a sign of maturity. You can still grow your hair out, but there are certain styles of hair which you are not able to pursue anymore or have because they are marks of youth and marks of inexperience and immaturity. Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. That's actually why some of our elders, when we used to dress our hair certain ways, they used to always look at us and tell us not to do that. And they used to always look down on us because even if they couldn't describe it, what they were essentially doing was they were remembering this long past and they were bringing it back. Many of us who are now older shunned them and used to be like, oh, whatever, old man, or whatever, old woman. And we used to move them aside and then go forward and, do as our ego wanted us to do. Negative ego, not positive ego. There's two of them, by the way. And in fact, they're kind of one and the same. It's just you kind of move your energy to a way that it shouldn't be. Anyway, so we used to just move them aside and just go along with what our ego wanted to say, what this society told us that we should be able to do. And what we find now is we are feeling the same way that the older folks used to feel, and we don't understand it. Well, it's because of this spirit. You can you can take the boy out of Africa, but you can't take Africa out of the boy. We were around in Africa for 2+ million years, and some people say that before the fall, we were there for billions of years, but whatever you believe is whatever you believe. I don't necessarily believe it, but the fall is something interesting that even Europeans now admit happened when you start talking about Atlantis and Lumeria and Mu and all of that. So Pangea kind of fits in there too. Anyway, not to get off on that. We remember this and those 2 million years in Africa compared to the, what is it, 400 years of enslavement. Ha ha. That's like putting a flea onto an elephant's back. The elephant remembers that it's an elephant and that the flea is just, that's nothing. Let's get it off there, right? So you have a lot of people who are now in their 40s and 50s who used to look at those older men and women 25, 30 years ago and say, you ain't got no idea what you're talking about, old man, old woman. Now realizing, oh crap, they had an idea, I just couldn't understand it. I'll give you a very good example of this. When I was a very young man, I was probably 6 or 7, and this embarrasses me horribly, man. I feel absolutely disgusted by this action, but it is a teachable thing, something that we need to learn from. When I was about 7, maybe 8, I think I would have been about 8 because that's when they, I think, were the biggest. My sister loved the New Kids on the Block, so I listened to countless hours of New Kids on the Block. If you don't know who New Kids on the Block is, they were kind of the white version of New Edition. And so there was a couple of songs, I can't remember the songs. I think one of them was called I'll Be Loving You Forever. No, it wasn't that song. Stop Girl, Don't Break My Heart or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, my father heard it and heard us all kind of, getting down to it and jamming to it. And my dad looked at me, big tall dude, 6'2", former a former boxer and old field hand. He was a smart man and did a lot of things with his hands. Very strong guy. And he said to us, he said particularly, it was weird because it was almost like he was directing it towards me and my younger brothers. And he goes, "Do you realize that they're singing black music?" And without skipping a beat, and I was 7. I said to him, "They're not singing black music." And he goes, "Yeah, a lot of these songs are old songs and they were sung by black people." I go, "No, they weren't." Now, what's funny is my dad, instead of arguing with me, a couple of weeks later, he had dug out of his collection, because in the old homes, the parents had collections of music, man. You had tons of records, tons of tapes, and sometimes even what were they called? 8-tracks, I think they were called. I came along after the 8-track, but they had all of it, right? So my dad went and he dug, and it's so funny how the mind works, because you don't necessarily, when you're a kid, time and space is so fluid. It's not static for you sometimes, so you don't make connections until you're older. Well, a couple of weeks later, my dad had dug out of his tapes a number of the songs that the New Kids on the Block were plagiarizing. And he played them. And I didn't even catch it. My dad did it. He did it, stealth-like. He did it slick-like. He played them. I didn't even catch it. But I was jamming to them. I loved them. It was great. Years later, in reflecting on stuff, I realized it's like, oh crap, something? Dad told me that. And then he played those songs to let me know, oh yeah, you think I don't know. But they're taking your culture and presenting it to you as it's yours. Now, years later, and I mean, like 20 something years later, almost 30 years later, not 30, about 25 years later, I was on YouTube because, love YouTube for a couple of reasons, but I was on YouTube and I was watching a lot of old videos of songs that I remember from the late 80s and early 90s, but never saw the videos to. So I was watching a lot of these videos, and what is very, 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 very evident among some of these videos, especially a lot of the ones when white people are involved, is they are copying black people to a T. It's undeniable. Dress, action, hairstyle, all of it, and dance. I gotta remember dance. Trying to all copy black people, and I didn't even get it. Like, there's a song, I can remember the artist's name. It's Taylor Dane, and if you watch the video, like, you hear the song, and I heard the song years ago, never seen the video. I thought Taylor Dane was black. Then when I seen the video, I was shocked to be like, whoa, white girl, but big hair like a black woman, big curly hair like a black woman, and even the voice, the connotations of her voice, it was all about imitating blackness and being about blackness. There's another one, Just Want to Hold You Tight. I can't remember who sings that. I think she had one hit. I think that was it. And that's another one. Like, I knew that was a white woman. Actually. But when I seen the video, I was like, oh crap. This is an ode to black music. She is straight up trying to be like a black R&B singer. There was another video, I think it was by her too, and it was undeniable. Like, she came walking out like a black woman. She was dressed like a black woman from the early 1990s. I'm talking like 1991, I think the song was. It was undeniable what they were aiming for. And I witnessed this time and time and time again. Just, even all the way back to like the mid 80s, the song Whip It Baby, Whip It Good, Whip It All Night. Love that song. Love the song. It's a great song. Um, and in fact, actually, am I thinking about the wrong one? I think it's Whip It. I apologize if it's not. Um, the song by the Whispers. But anyway, if you watch the song, if you watch the video, they do a very quick intersplicing of white women constantly, and you barely recognize it because it's quick and then it's gone. It's quick and then it's gone. And you're like, what the hell is that all about? And this is something that they repeated time and time and time again. You can see it. You can see it. And so, the reason why I bring it up is because one, it is interesting to me. And two, um, to let you know that this movement to kind of co-opt black music has been going on for a long time. Bobby Hemmett actually mentioned that the major co-option of particularly R&B style music by white folks, this major co-option took place in the 90s. And particularly, he doesn't say this part, but I do, after the communication legislation, what was it? The Telecommunications Act of, I think it was 94, it was enacted or it was put into law in 95. After that happened, you've seen great groups like Boyz II Men disappear overnight. Whereas in the first half of the 90s, 1990 to 1995, black music, particularly that new era, new jack swing, black R&B and soul music was setting the pace. It was setting the pace. It was to the point where, like, you had a group like All for One, where their only legitimacy was on the backs of the fact that they had a black dude who could do that deep soulful rhythm. And I know people would think, like, well, man, that's crazy. Come on, man. But seriously, if you didn't have that ability to do at least a harmonizing that was infectious, that was why there was that one group, I think they were called 4 p.m. They had limited success because they were able to do the harmonizing. They just couldn't get that soulful part. But at that moment in time, man, black people set the trend of music. You couldn't do anything unless you adhered to the trends that black people were setting. By the second half of the 1990s, after the Telecommunications Act of 94, which was enacted in 95, after that occurred, forget it. Your biggest group suddenly turned into white folks. Our R&B, true R&B music was not heard on mainstream. Again, Boyz II Men, probably in the first 5 years, of the 1990s. Forget about one of the best. They were probably the best selling group of that era. R&B group, I guess, because I don't want to take away from some of the other guys who probably did sell a lot of records too. But they were huge. And then from 95, 96 to the year 2000, Boyz II Men couldn't buy a hit. I know people are going to be like, well, what about the Song for Mama? Compare how Song for Mama did compared to like Water Runs Dry, which was even a lesser hit from Boyz II Men 2. I'll Make Love to You and all of that. It was two different areas. And I know we're told about issues with the labels and what have you, but see, we don't put it into the perspective of, remember, the labels work for the distributors, not the other way around. That's why you have all of these big companies involved in distribution, because then they can set the rate and the tone of the music. They can then walk into record labels and say, either you're going to produce this or we're not going to distribute it. That's all that matters. And Adina Howard, if you remember her, Freaking Me, she actually had an album that was more jazzy and more reflective of black tones. She recorded it. She had it set to come out. They said, "We're not putting this crap out. We want you to do something like Freak Like Me. Do that, and then we'll put that out." I read an article a couple of years ago, actually, yeah, back in 2017, where Too Short ran into that, where they kept pushing him, and he was very upfront. These were white people, and the one guy he was talking about was Jewish. But this guy straight up told him, "Yeah, let's do one of these raunchy albums." And then Too Short came back to him after he did the raunchy album and said, "Okay, now we got to do the other side of that. Let me put something positive out there. Let me do an album that really matters." And he's like, "Oh, why are you going to want to do that? Let's just keep going with this and it's all good." And they never let him do that album. What they did in the 90s was, again, we don't make the connection, and we need to make the connection. What they did in the 90s was they took a look at black music and said, if we keep letting black people set the agenda for music, we are never going to be able to control it because they have all the talent. We have to make it impossible for them to set the rhythm and set the tone of the music so then we could take it over. With the Telecommunications Act, you had massive conglomerization of distributors, of radio stations, and what you saw was, and you can track it today, you don't have to believe me, do the research. What you saw was the number of black radio stations, particularly black-owned radio stations, decreased dramatically in the next 10 years. Dramatically. And isn't it kind of ironic that the quality of the music that we've seen also decreased, ironically? Maybe that's just coincidence. It might just be coincidence. But I could tell you personally, you've seen a difference. And there was another piece of legislation that was passed, I think it was 92 or 93, which changed rap music. I heard Chuck D talk about it, but I've never been able to discover the piece of legislation. But what it essentially did was everybody knows Chuck D. Chuck D is the founding member of, or a founding member of, Public Enemy. Everyone remembers that Public Enemies, or at least if you're old enough to remember their style was very, very unique. They kind of spliced and cut a lot of stuff into their music. This is what black people did. This is the beginning of hip hop. The beginning of hip hop was doing the same thing. So that's what they did. Well, what this new legislation did was it made that type of music too expensive to produce. By putting price tags, if I understand it correctly, by putting high enough price tags on those samples of music, so that if you put together a song like Fight the Power, it would cost $100,000 to produce. Now, here's the funny thing about this, and I mean this. This is absolutely hilarious. This was during an age where corporations were making, people like Public Enemy were putting out albums that were selling 2 million copies. So if the record label was pulling back $2 or $3, 2 million albums, that's $6 million. That's more than enough to pay for 20 songs where you're putting $100,000 into a song. Now, mind you, today they don't have a problem doing it because the music is far worse. But at the time, they were worried about consciousness, and they were worried about the elevation of consciousness. So they passed this law immediately. And I noticed this, and this is why, like, when you listen to somebody like TLC, if you listen to the song Friends, which I listened to actually this past week, there is a lot going on in that song. There is a ton going on in that song. But by 1995, the beginning of 1995, you've seen a dramatic change in the quality and depth of music. And I'll never forget this. I got my first radio when I was in 6th grade. I was in 6th grade. So I was about 12. I think I was 11 at the time. Excuse me. And every Saturday, I listened to a specific radio station and listened to the music. I listen to music all the time anyway after getting my radio. So I will never forget. I finally got my own room when I was 12 years old. I was about to be 13. My mom and dad gave me my own room finally. And one Saturday, I was listening to the music, and I remember actually thinking, this music sounds different than it did like 6, 7 months ago. Like there is something missing in it. At the time, my favorite song was I Got the Power by Snap. Loved that song. Still love that song. And those type of songs where it just seemed like there was so much going on in them, I absolutely adored. And then I looked at the newer music, and I was like, man, it just seems less than. Years later, I would say it kind of seemed hollow. And that continued through the rest of the 90s. Now, the intriguing part about all this, I didn't mean to go into all that, but I'll let the spirit speak when it wants to speak. The intriguing part about all that is the reason why I really did this video was because of jazz. It is becoming absolutely clear to me that the greatest theft from black people of music, the type of music that needs to be played in every single black community all the time, is jazz music. I forgot who I first heard say it. I do know Bobby Hemmett has said it, but I heard it prior to Bobby Hemmett saying it. I heard it, I want to say 5 years ago. The statement that really blew my mind at the time, that I heard it, was that people are always wondering where the black classical artists are. Well, the answer is they're in jazz music. Jazz is where all the black classical artists are. That is where your black Beethovens and Bachs are. And I'm going to tell you, I have found, so a few years ago, I mentioned this in another video. A few years ago, I started watching jazz. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. And the music was good. I mean, I was listening to some of the ordinary folks, John Coltrane, and that one just jumps out in my mind. But John Coltrane was one of the guys. But immediately upon going into looking up jazz, I said, I don't want the guys who I know about. I want to find people who I don't know. One of the people who I found was like Wes Montgomery. He was, and he passed away in the early 1960s. He was a guitarist, a very good, amazing jazz guitarist. Not a guy that's going to blow your mind necessarily with some of his fingering, but when you allow his music to touch you, I mean, it really just, it flows through you and elevates you and moves you. So, when I first started out, I was really looking for stuff that I didn't know about. And I'll be honest, I was looking for black people. I wanted black jazz music. The interesting part about that was when I was searching for it on YouTube, they kept giving me white people. So I would have to wade through 3 pages of white artists before I get to black artists. I'm like, what the heck's going on here? Anyway, though, after finding a good maybe 120 albums, I kind of stopped looking for a while. Well, over the last 8 months, 10 months, I've been back on it. I've been looking again. And really over the last 3 or 4 months, I've been looking again. And I'm going to tell you, family, it is just mind-blowing, the type of artistry that in 1950, yeah, in the 1950s, in the 1960s, was in the black community when it comes to jazz music. And trust me when I tell you, it is undeniable to me when you really dig into jazz music. It's undeniable to me that if it had not been for that level of um artistic inventory that came from the jazz musicians, the blues musicians, the bebop musicians, which really came from jazz and blues, and the bluegrass musicians, which we don't even hear about the black bluegrass tradition. But all of these types of traditions that were hidden in the hills of Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, your early country music came not only just from white folks, but a lot of those white folks heard black people playing it. Oh man, it's amazing. But if it wasn't for all of that, you wouldn't have the big band stuff, the swing, big band and swing come from the black tradition. And then further down the line, you wouldn't have rock and roll. Rock and roll was just another form of taking all of this and just putting it together. You wouldn't have that. Then you wouldn't have hip hop. Because you wouldn't have had the soul of James Brown. I mean, you can hear jazz in James Brown. You wouldn't have had the funk. You can hear jazz in the funk of Parliament and Funkadelic. You can hear it. I mean, you wouldn't have had the hip hop and the new R&B and all of that good stuff. We have been completely cut off from our heritage of jazz music. I mean, it's phenomenal. I just discovered, to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, I just discovered this woman, Mary Lou Williams, who did this album called the Zodiak Suite. And it is it's songs. It's individual pieces written for each of the zodiac signs. And it's amazing. It sounds great. There's an album which I've listened to before, but I couldn't find one. I was looking for a copy of the album on YouTube that was in playlist form, because the one that I had originally found had like huge gaps of like space in it, so it didn't play right. Anyway, it's a album with Thelonious Monk, or it's called the Thelonious Monk Quartet with John Coltrane. With John Coltrane, it is absolutely fascinating. And then there's another one which I'm looking for right now. Uh I think the way you pronounce his name is Erroll Gardner. Erroll Gardner. Erroll Gardner. And you want to talk about a masterful pianist. You want to talk about a masterful pianist. He was really, well, him and Thelonious Monk were really what got me to thinking about, the classical element in jazz music. And, you know, you never produce anything that is not inside of you already. That is a stern belief in me. And there has been many people who have said that if it had not been for the Moors, you wouldn't have had a Bach, you wouldn't have had a Beethoven, you wouldn't have had any of that. You wouldn't have even had Shakespeare. None of it. It was the Moors who brought all that in. And I look at these guys, particularly the Erroll Gardner. There's this album called The Complete Concert by the Sea. And you if you think you know classical music, listen to that album. Oh, listen to that album. It blows you away. It blows you away. Um it really is fantastic stuff to listen to. And there's another one, and I can't find it. So I guess there isn't another one. But I wish I could too. It's a nice one. It's jazz and what is it? It's jazz and like Negro spirituals or African spirituals. Um, Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can find this. Yes, the album is called Grant Green Feel In, Lin, Feel In, The Spirit. And it's awesome because it's jazz music, but it's also African spirituals, and it's or should I say Negro spirituals. So it's kind of really nice. So I've been talking about this, for like the last month, and I'm sorry if you don't like it. I really am, because I'm going to keep talking about it. The jazz music, I implore you to try it. Give it a month. Dedicate yourself to listening to jazz music for a month. And you're going to notice a change in your home. You're going to notice a change in your mind processes, the way that you feel, the way that you react, the way that you act. It's amazing. The stuff that they are pumping to us now called music, man, it is the most spiritually, mentally, emotionally destructive crap that can be produced. And the reason for that is because despite the fact that you have a lot of black faces to it, the root is no longer connected. And that's the problem. The root is no longer connected. A lot of these black folks, they're sucking air, basically. And so they're not able to do what they need to do to produce the type of music that they need to produce. All right, so that does it. Questions, comments, concerns, let me know. Post them below. I'll see you next time.